Hello and welcome to the Modern Propagandist. Today's episode is, What is Misinformation? Let's imagine for a moment that tonight you tuck yourself into bed, snuggle up with your pillow and your best teddy bear, and tomorrow morning you wake up to find that you've been transferred back in time. You are a kid again. Your mom comes into your room to wake you up. Honey, it's time to wake up. Did you leave the fan on again? You're gonna catch a cold. You get out of bed, stumble down the hallway to take a nice shower, and you come down to breakfast. There, your little sister looks at you and says, "Your hair's wet. You're gonna catch a cold." Disregarding her, you eat some delicious breakfast, and afterwards, since this is a fantasy world, you look outside to see that the sun is shining and that your lovely backyard pool is calling your name. You leave the breakfast table and begin to run down to the pool, but before you get there, your big brother stops you. "Hey, come on now, Chief. You can't go for a swim. You might get a cramp and drown." Dismayed, you go back inside to wait. Later on in the afternoon, you find yourself chewing some delicious bubble gum. After a few minutes, it loses its flavor and you decide to swallow it. Once again, your little sister is there to see it, and she cries at you, "That's going to be in your stomach for 7 years." Well, life goes on. Later on, you're cracking your knuckles. Grandma looks at you from the chair, diverts her eyes away from her knitting and says, "Honey, that's gonna give you arthritis." Well, all right, so you stop. It sounds believable enough. And you sneak into the kitchen. There is a nice steamy cup of hot coffee. Now, yesterday you were an adult, so, maybe you had a cup of coffee or two, and, well, you're craving one. As you go over to the table, you sneak up, reach up, pull the delicious coffee to your mouth, and take a big swig. You put it back on the table and turn, only to see your grandpapa there looking at you. "That'll stunt your growth." Well, eventually you go back to bed, and this time you're careful to turn off the fan. You wake up the next day and, well, here we are, back to the real world. Now, in this, we had 6 examples of misinformation. And you'll notice misinformation is threaded into the daily lives of countless people just like you and I. It takes the form of old wives' tales, folk health remedies, wholesale memes that misrepresent the truth, such as the report of dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice that we'll talk about a bit later. But misinformation can also take on more serious and contemporary topics like connections between politicians and seemingly tangential world events, misguided instructions of what to do in case of an emergency, and what we've been seeing more and more of these days, information about COVID-19, for example, home remedies and the looming vaccinations that some people say may cause problems, may not cause problems, can prove deadly, are going to put a microchip inside of your body, are going to trace you here and there and everywhere. Well, perhaps a lot of these people are just trying to warn you, trying to make you feel informed about what's going on. And that's at the heart of what misinformation is. So, to pose the question one more time, what exactly is misinformation? Much like its sister term, disinformation, that we tackled in episode 1, misinformation takes on multiple meanings depending on where you look. So let's take a look at a few, and then let's create our own simple definition from those. According to Oxford Languages, it is, quote, "false or inaccurate information, especially that which is intended to deceive," unquote. Well, that's a bit too close to disinformation to be particularly helpful to us. As we saw in our fantastical example earlier, your family wasn't trying to necessarily deceive you. They just wanted the best for you. So maybe we can take something from that, but we'll see. Let's take a gander at another one. Dictionary.com paints the word as, quote, false information that is spread regardless of whether there is intent to mislead, unquote. Well, that kind of just sounds like a politician trying to cover all the bases. Well, now, everybody, it's false information, but we don't know if there's any malevolent intent behind it. Perhaps there is, perhaps there isn't. We're just going to have to deal with what it is and how it is. It's just the way it is. All right. It's a little more helpful, but it's still not right on the money. Let's take a look at the old tried and true Merriam-Webster. Quote, incorrect or misleading information, unquote. Short and sweet. I can agree to that, but it is missing something. Let's tap into some scholarly work to help us out. Taking a look into the early pages of Network Propaganda, Manipulation, Disinformation, and Radicalization in American Politics by Bankler, Ferris, and Roberts, they write, quote, the unintentional spread of false beliefs, unquote. All right, that just might be the missing puzzle piece. So, taking a look at all of them, let's say that misinformation is, quote, the consumption and dispersal of false information and or beliefs that lack malevolent intent. That last bit helps to separate it from our definition of disinformation in episode 1. Disinformation, if you remember, is, quote, false information that is intentionally created and disseminated to persuade people of something, unquote. Okay, wait a minute. That's a little confusing, isn't it? Let's break this down a little bit more. So, disinformation is false information that is created to persuade people of something that is not true. Okay. Misinformation is information that people share and others believe is true, although it is not true, and it is shared again because they believe it to be true. So it just basically relies on the intentions behind the sharing of the information. Easy. Disinformation is shared with malevolent intent, with bad intent, and misinformation is shared because people believe the information to be true. In both cases, the information is false, but the reason for its propagation are what makes them differ. But wait, there's more. So, where does misinformation come from? This is the kicker, isn't it? In many cases, it was probably created to answer some question that couldn't be answered by a person or by the science of the day. For example, colds. A cold is actually a virus. It lives inside a host and causes the familiar symptoms we know: coughs, sniffles, maybe a bit of a fever. But before germ theory and before viruses were known to exist, how would you explain a cold?
Well, little Gunther, it seems we have come down with a wee bit of a cold. I told you playing outside in the chilly air would give you a cold, didn't I?
Perhaps quite a bit of misinformation has trickled down over countless generations trying to address such problems. Other instances are simple misattribution errors. In 2020, viral videos appeared to show dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice. This story was later debunked by showing that the footage was from a city some 750 kilometers away, which, although it was rather rare for such marine creatures to cruise up into the area, it was not unheard of. A story like this one doesn't really harm anyone, but it does share a false truth with people across the globe. Now, with that said, it is important to note that disinformation can indeed become misinformation as well. In the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, the internet was abuzz with mis- and disinformation. One such claim was that drinking rubbing alcohol would disinfect oneself from contact with COVID-19. A 35-year-old man downed a bottle of 91% rubbing alcohol after touching his own face at a grocery store. After passing out inside his home, spending a brief stint in a coma at the hospital, he was released. Another man, 40 years old this time, was admitted to the hospital suffering, quote, from a caustic burn injury because he accidentally swallowed industrial-strength bleach thinking that it would cure him of the virus, unquote. Here, perhaps folks created the information believing it to be true and sharing it in hope of helping someone. Or perhaps people created it knowing full well people who attempted to do such a thing would be greatly injured in the process. It is here where we see kind of a Schrodinger's misinformation come into play, in which misinformation both is and isn't disinformation until it is checked by an observer. Once again, misinformation comes in a lot of shapes, from old wives' tales to false medical claims, to how strong you believed your dad was when you were a child. And many of them are relatively harmless. But when they do pertain to serious subjects, it is best to dig a bit deeper than a meme you saw on Facebook or a video about vaginal power stones you saw on YouTube and liked. If you are not sure if something is true, follow these steps. Step number 1. Stop. Take a breath. And ask yourself, is this really true? A headline like, quote, Hillary Clinton and the ghost of Elvis leading the UN army to invade Portland amid riots, unquote. Just take a second. It doesn't take a genius to realize that this is probably something I should double check. All right? Perhaps clickbait titles are getting just a little bit out of hand. Number 2, pose the question. Is there anything that directly comes to mind to counter this claim? Things like basic biology, chemistry, or math can go a long way in combating the simplest of misinformation. Should I drink bleach? Probably not. Should I drink 91% rubbing alcohol? Once again, probably not. Number 3, use your Google foo. If you aren't sure of something, don't be scared of doing research. While Google isn't the end-all be-all of information, it is a great place to start finding out information. If you can do it to find places to eat, you can sure as heck do it to see if information is true or not. Number 4, ask yourself if the information or explanation appeals to a very specific worldview. If you begin researching and you do find information to back up the claim, be sure that it is as unbiased as can be. Now, it's pretty tough to find things that are not necessarily biased, but you should shoot for things that are unbiased as possible. Many folks will jump on the bandwagon fallacy and vouch for things that sound about right and produce what they call a lot of evidence, quote-unquote evidence, to back it up, especially with politics, medicines, and religion. Be sure to really take your time to research important and potentially dangerous things. Next one. Still stumped? Find an expert. We live in the most globally connected time since the dawn of our species. Channel this great power to find an expert in the field. Even crowdsourcing information from websites like Reddit or Quora could help give you the answer closest to the truth, and if nothing else, give you a platform to try and hear as many voices as possible to make up your own damn mind. And last but not least, if all else fails, head to your local library and see if they can aid you in your quest. We are now at the conclusion of episode 2, What is Misinformation? And I hope that you are all walking away from this episode putting on your sunglasses as explosions blow up behind you, better equipped to fight the mis and disinformation out there than you were before. Remember, we are all propagandists for some platform. We might as well make it for the betterment of society. Until next time, onward! Hello again, this is Joshua Niebert from The Modern Propagandist, reaching out to you one last time. If you like what you hear today, please feel free to share it. Right now, we're just trying to get the word out and share what we got to say. So, we're not asking for money. We're not asking for your hand in marriage. Just, spread our name around. Put us out there in town. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to drop them in the comments below and we'll get back to you. Thank you.